Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on your time zone and the country that you are joining from. Welcome to our IELTS Azerbaijan's and IELTS Turkey joint webinar, Hope in the Classroom, Educating Global Citizens Through Language. My name is Shalala Mehmedli, and I'm an IELTS ambassador from Azerbaijan. And I'm delighted to be here with all of you today. I would also like to warmly welcome my dear friend, our co-host, Gülbin Özdemir, IELTS ambassador from Turkey. Thank you for joining us, Gülbin.
Thank you.
And for those who may not be familiar, IELTS is a non-profit multinational organization run by a global community of volunteers. Our mission is to offer free resources, support, and professional development to English teachers worldwide. We are very excited to bring this webinar to you as part of our continuing efforts to connect educators globally. So today we are exploring the topic of hope in the classroom, how language education can nurture global citizenship, empathy, and critical thinking in our rapidly changing world. As English teachers, I think that we have even more responsibility and more opportunities to foster global citizenship and empathy in our students. So I'm extremely honored to introduce our distinguished speakers to all of you. Professor Keith Barton, a former elementary teacher and a professor of curriculum and instruction at Indiana University, where he prepares teachers and educational researchers. His scholarship focuses on history, human rights, and social sciences as preparation for civic participation, and he has conducted research on teaching and learning in the US, Northern Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, and many other countries. He is co-author with Professor Li-Ching of Curriculum for Justice and Harmony, Deliberation, Knowledge and Action in Social and Civic Education. And he has authored several other influential works on history and social studies education. His research has appeared in journals such as the American Educational Research Journal, Journal of Teacher Education, and Teachers College Record, and his work has been translated into 8 languages. I would like to greet our second guest, dear Professor Li-Ching Ho, Professor of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She conducts research primarily in East and Southeast Asia on global civic education, diversity in social studies, and climate change education. She is co-editor of the Palgrave Handbook of Global Citizenship and Education and co-author with Professor Keith Barton of Curriculum for Justice and Harmony. Her articles have been published in journals including Teachers College Record, Cambridge Journal of Education, and Theory and Research in Social Education. Professor Li-Ching Ho has also worked extensively as a research collaborator, invited speaker, and workshop facilitator in countries such as China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Brunei, and the Philippines. So we are truly privileged to have both of you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Great. Well, it looks like I'm going to be starting here. So hopefully that shares my screen.
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Great. So Dr. Ho and I will both be talking about teaching for hope today. And even though I'm going to do the first part and Dr. Ho will do the second, but that's just a division of labor. Everything that we're talking about are ideas that we've kind of jointly developed. And I'll start off by pointing out that although each of us has a lot of international experience, everything we say really has to be adapted to different contexts. Obviously, we can't give examples from every country that you're from, and we can't know about every place that we haven't been to. So just as we go through some of these ideas, think about how would this apply to your setting? How could you extend or revise this in terms of your own setting? Both of us are in social and civic education, which means we're really concerned with things like preparing students for social issues. And students anywhere in the world are going to be confronted with countless social issues, whether in their lives today or when they grow up. Some of the specific problems and issues will differ from one setting to another, but there's no place in the world, obviously, that's immune from social issues. And unfortunately, these days, it seems like many of these are getting worse instead of better. So students are going to have to deal with social issues, and they're going to have to take action on them throughout their lives, either as these issues affect their own lives, affect their friends and families and communities, affect their nation, and affect people throughout the world. So student action is just a part of what it means to learn about social issues. Both Dr. Ho and I believe very deeply that schools should prepare students to do that thoughtfully, that we should provide the kinds of understanding that will help them make intelligent choices about how to respond to social issues throughout their lives. And yet, one of the problems in teaching about social issues is it can seem very overwhelming. Probably many of us as adults feel a real sense of despair. And we wonder, what is it that we can actually do to deal with some of these momentous issues that we see all around us? And students feel the same way. When students learn about large social issues, uh, it can be hard for them to see what could be done about this. Uh, this shows up all the time when students learn about things like climate change. So some quotations from other studies here. One student said, well, it makes you a bit panicky and stuff like, oh, I'm going to die. What's the point of doing anything? We're all going to die. Another student said, I'd cry to mom and be like, Mom, we're going to die. And she'd be like, why? And I was like, because we're killing our planet. That's why. Other students said, it's like you're stuck. You learn about the drastic stuff that's happened and not even how we can do anything. Another student said, well, it was something we were learning about, climate change, but we weren't learning what to do or how to cope with it. In Dr. Ho's and my conversations with young people, we've heard very similar comments as they talk about they've come to understand and appreciate the enormity of climate change, but they say it feels like people expect them to somehow solve it. And yet adults have had the opportunity to address this for decades and haven't done anything. How can it be up to young people to solve this? So that's why it can really lead to these feelings of anxiety, grief, fatalism, and hopelessness. So we believe it's really important, and this is one of the main themes of the talk today, to develop a sense of hope in students. And before we go too deeply into this, I'd like for you to just think about what are some words that come to mind when you think of hope. Do this in English, or else I'll be excluded from it. What are maybe 2 or 3 words that you think of when you hear about hope? And then in just a second, I'm going to ask you to put those in the chat box, but not yet. So go ahead and write down 2 or 3 things that occur to you, words or phrases. And since I see that many people decided to go ahead and start, well, go ahead and do that now. Drop those into the chat box if you haven't already. And scroll through and look at some of the ones that other people have put in. You can see there's a variety of different words and phrases people have come up with. People have looked at it from different angles. And uh, several of the things that people have mentioned are things that will show up as we go on talking about this. But keep those in mind as we think about how we might actually teach for hope. And I wanted to point out that there's a fair amount of research on the impact of hope on people and on young people. Hope provides a greater sense of agency and of confidence, that is, a belief that you can actually do something in the world. It increases the motivation to take action because that makes sense. If you thought that there was no hope, why would you bother to take action? And I think importantly, it leads to psychological and emotional well-being. People who are hopeful are better adjusted to the world. In thinking about hope, in our work, we differentiate two kinds of hope. One is pragmatic hope. That's more short term. Pragmatic hope is a belief in the viability of realistic short-term strategies to achieve a better future, like a microfinance program for small farmers, something like that. Something not necessarily small scale, but smaller scale, something achievable in the near future. We call that pragmatic hope. But alongside pragmatic hope is visionary hope. And that's something much broader, much more long term. Visionary hope refers to belief in a world beyond present day realities. So, not just something tangible and concrete that can be achieved soon. It may be something that would take many years to achieve and that would really, as it suggests here, indicate a different kind of world that we live in. Both kinds are important, and I think it's important to keep both in mind as we teach, both the big picture hope and the smaller, more pragmatic versions of hope. Dr. Ho, did you have anything you wanted to add at this point?
No, not really. I'll build on this in the second half of the presentation.
Great. And I see that somebody has the name hopeful in their own name, so that's great. So what does hope require? And more importantly, how can we develop it in schools? Because of course, that's what we're all interested in as teachers, is what role might we play in developing hope? Well, it's tempting to think of hope as just sort of this general feeling, people kind of sitting around feeling good about themselves, feeling good about the world. But we want to emphasize that hope depends on a lot more than just feelings and attitudes. I mean, hope is a feeling and an attitude, but it can be hard to develop attitudes in students. So what we want to emphasize is the role of knowledge. What do students need to know in order to develop hope? Now, my photos on this, because I put this slide together, they're all primary or elementary students because that's who I work mainly with. Dr. Ho is more of a secondary educator, and so her examples will probably be more secondary oriented. But I've chosen these to show that you have to learn some things in order to be hopeful. Well, what are those things? What exactly is it that students need to be knowledgeable about? And in our framework, we talk about three things: possibilities, goals, and pathways. So we'll talk about what each of those three things means. But I think it's helpful not just to see hope as this very general thing, but as something made up of some specific components that we can develop in teaching students. First one I want to talk about is possibilities. So oftentimes people, whether children or adults, believe that they're stuck with the world the way it is, like Winnie the Pooh stuck in the hole. So like people may think that nationalism is inevitable and conflict between nations is inevitable. Or they may feel like different racial groups or religious groups will always be in conflict with each other. They may think that that all economics is about selfish motives, or that capitalism is the only way to organize production, that people always exploit the environment, or that gender roles are always restrictive. Point here is that sometimes people believe that the way the world is the way that it has to be. And when that's the case, it can be hard to be hopeful. I mean, you might be hopeful for yourself and think that, well, I can compete with other people, but it's hard to imagine a better world if you think that the world is already the way it has to be. So one of the things students need to learn about is that it is possible for the world to be different. The way that the world is organized now, whether in terms of race or religion or gender or whatever, that's not the only way that things can be. And in fact, there are plenty of examples of other ways of thinking about the world. And this is, I think, a core part of Teaching for Hope, is helping students, for example, learn about cooperation among people of different racial, religious, national backgrounds. So, for example, the top image here, a lot of my work has been in Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, kids and adults tend to assume that it's always going to be Catholics versus Protestants, or nationalists versus unionists, that these are two groups that can never get along. But in fact, in history, there have been plenty of times when Catholics and Protestants have worked together. The example here is of a labor union that brought them together. A few months ago, there were these major fires in Los Angeles in Southern California, and Mexico sent firefighters to help out with those. We can look at these examples all over the world, different times and places. Whenever there's a need, when there's a crisis, people find a way to work together, even with people who at first glance may seem very different than they are. And I think one of our responsibilities as educators is to help students see these examples, because they may not see them anywhere else except at school. So I think we have to make a special effort to help students see that people can work together and do work together. It's not just a belief. There are actually examples of this happening. In a similar way, students can learn that the way the environment or the economy works is not the only way that it has to work. They could learn about things like the cooperative movement that's been important in countries around the world. They could learn about things like native forms of wildlife management. The Menominee Nation is close to where Dr. Ho works now, and they have centuries of managing their forest resources in a sustainable way. The other picture here shows scientists and indigenous people working together to manage fisheries. So the kind of capitalist mode of environmental exploitation or competitiveness, those are not the only ways that the economy can exist. So students need to learn about these alternatives. So that's what we mean by saying students need to learn about possibilities. Also, they should learn about times when people have been able to successfully change the world. Again, if you think that there's no reason to even try, then why bother? But many times throughout history and in the world today, people have changed the world. The black and white photo here is of something really important in American history, the Montgomery bus boycott, when people boycotted the segregated bus system and were able to overturn segregation on transportation. There have been plenty of labor strikes in the United States and around the world that have been successful. In some Latin American countries, small farmers have been able to resist multinational corporations that have attempted to constrain the kinds of seeds they use and the kinds of agriculture they engage in. And then the picture of the birds here, you may recognize that these are bald eagles. It's the American symbol. But I guess 50 years ago, about 50 to 60 years ago, bald eagles were very endangered. And one of the reasons they were endangered was that a common pesticide caused the shells of of the chicks to be too weak to survive. But that pesticide, DDT, and similar pesticides, because of people's actions, environmentalists, activists, scientists, they worked together to get that law changed so that it would prohibit DDT. And as a result, there are now a lot of bald eagles. They're no longer endangered. So people can take action to change the world. Unfortunately, Dr. Ho and I found that sometimes when we ask students for examples of people successfully changing the world, they can't really think of any. And again, I think this is one of our responsibilities as teachers, is help them know that, yes, here are some specific times people have done this. So that's all about possibilities. I'm going to talk about goals. And I have a very different take on this than a lot of people. So goals means learning about the ideals that have motivated people over time and that still do today. And I include Nelson Mandela here as an example of a figure that's often taught about in schools around the world as sort of an inspirational figure. And there are many other people who students would learn about as figures of inspiration. But I think it's worth thinking more about, why would we teach about Nelson Mandela? And I think it's very limiting to just teach about him as a source of inspiration. Oftentimes, students know about people like human rights leaders or other important figures, but they don't know what those people stood for. And if all you know is that Nelson Mandela stood up for something, but you don't know what he stood up for, I'm not really sure that's worth learning about. Students need to learn the specifics. What were the ideals that Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress and other anti-apartheid activists were fighting for? This too is something that oftentimes is missing in students' understanding. I gave you the example earlier of the Montgomery bus boycott. So this was an attempt to stop segregation, or actually just to change segregation on public transportation in one city. And one of the leaders in that was Rosa Parks. Well, most Americans know who Rosa Parks were, but if you ask what she did, they'll just say, well, she stood up for herself. But they don't actually know what it was all about. And if you don't know the specific ideals that have motivated people, I'm not sure that just simple inspiration by itself is enough. It's important for students to know, to have knowledge of the specifics. Then the last thing here is pathways. And by pathways, we mean learning about the specific strategies and actions that people have taken to achieve their goals. Because again, if it's too general, if students just know that, oh, well, people work to make the world better, that doesn't provide any guidance to them. They need to know, what are the actual range of things people can do, whether it's a boycott or public addresses, protest, engaging in some kind of direct action. They need to know, what are the actions that they can take? In our most recent interviews with some students in Ireland, learning about climate change. This is one of the things students consistently point to as something that they appreciate having learned about. They'll say, well, we used to know that climate change was important, but we didn't know what to do about it. Now we've learned some specific strategies that we can take to address climate change. And, this has to be, complicated knowledge. They need to think about and learn about what works and what doesn't. What things support action and what things stand in the way of action. And also importantly, what are the secondary or unintended consequences for action? That is, just because you think something's a good idea doesn't mean it will work, or doesn't mean that it won't have negative side effects. These are the kinds of things that students also need to be learning about, so they have a better foundation for thinking about what will actually work in the world. So those three things, possibilities, goals, and pathways, are the knowledge component of developing a sense of hope. Howard Zinn, the late Howard Zinn, was an important American historian. And he talked about hope, and he said, to be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. And students really need to learn about these things, not, again, just as general ideas, but they need to know specific people, groups, movements that engaged in these hopeful kinds of activities throughout history or in the world today. If it's just telling students, oh, you should sacrifice, or you should be courageous, just telling students that is probably not going to accomplish much. But if you can help them learn case studies of people who have done these things, of groups that have done these things, that provides a lot greater sense of hope. So we won't have time to discuss it in an open-ended way right now, because I want to make sure that Dr. Ho gets her chance to talk. But one of the things, obviously, that we would like for you to think about is, how could you center hope in your own work, knowing that it's going to be different in different settings, different for different people. But we'd like for you to think about that. And then finally, if you scan this QR code, it should take you to this article that we've written on centering hope and what in the United States is called social studies education. If you try that and you get some kind of warning, you should be able to ignore that and just choose open in browser. But you may not even get the warning anyway. So I'll just leave this up for a moment so that you can try scanning that. And if not, you can certainly email us later on, and we can provide access to this and perhaps another article that we've written about hope. Dr. Ho, is there anything you'd like to say about my presentation, or do you want to just move right on into yours?
I think I can move right on, given the constraints of time.
Yeah.
All right. So, you've heard from Dr. Barton about hope and its various dimensions, and also some suggestions that we've offered in terms of incorporating the concept of hope into the classroom. So here I'm going to continue doing that, but also make a direct connection to global citizenship education. So what I'd like to do right now is to ask everyone to put into the chat what they think is the connection between hope and global citizenship education. So as we talk about global citizenship education all the time, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about the connections that you see. Why is hope important in global citizenship education, or does it not have a place?
I can see that we have some answers here.
Yeah, there are some great responses, including one that's just been posted, like there's no success can be received without hope. And we need to have this hope for a sustainable future. All right. So I think that some of these responses really reflect how hope is actually integral or central to global citizenship education. Because, without hope for a better future, what is the point of engaging young people to think deeply about and to take action for the well-being of people and environment, right? Global citizenship education, in my opinion, is fundamentally hopeful, right? I mean, otherwise it will not exist. We want to prepare young people for the possibility of a better world. Nobody wants to prepare young people for the possibility of a world that's worse, right? So that's why we include things like human rights education, environmental education, questions like that. So that's just the point I want to make. We need to center hope, right? Not make it like, implicit or marginal, but we really want to communicate that message of hope, right? And we need to understand, as Dr. Barton has pointed out, why hope is essential. But hope is not just a warm, fuzzy feeling. As Dr. Barton has pointed out, we need to identify what dimensions of hope are important. So, for example, are we introducing young people to case studies or examples of pragmatic hope or visionary hope? What are the purposes of introducing case studies of each? Are we focusing more on possibilities or pathways or goals? So we've broken the big concept of hope down into different elements. All right. And that again is, I think, super relevant to global citizenship education because even though the definition of global citizenship education changes or is contested, essentially global citizenship education aims to help students understand different perspectives, different societal norms and values, global cosmopolitan ideals. Right. We also want to help young people learn to work collaboratively with diverse others and plan appropriate social actions. Concurrently, we also hope to help them compare different issues, systematically analyze them, and analyze relevant policies enacted by different forms of government or non-governmental organizations. So, as you can see, these are the important elements of global citizenship education. And the next question you might ask me is like, how do we bring all this into the classroom? How do we incorporate hope? And that's where deliberation comes into play. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to provide an example of a model of deliberation that both Dr. Barton and I developed. And we are happy to provide more resources, but I'm just going to provide a quick overview to show how this model of collaborative deliberation can incorporate hope, can address different dimensions of global citizenship education, can help students think deeply about and in a systematic way about different social issues and planning of appropriate social action. Because the last thing that we want to do is ask students, just go and take action. But sometimes uninformed action is worse than no action at all, right? So we want them to take informed action. So what do we mean by deliberation? So one of the things that we need to clarify is that deliberation is a unique form of discussion. Essentially, it's a type of discussion for the purpose of making collective decisions. So there are many kinds of discussions that we use in the classroom, right? We can have Socratic discussion that has a different goal. We can have more general discussions for the purpose of clarifying ideas. But here, deliberation is for making a decision. All right, and it comes from the root word libra, which is to weigh or to scale. So the overarching question that we need to think about is, what should we do? So deliberation is important, especially for global citizenship education, because it forces young people to consider different alternatives and consequences of different policies and solutions. Now, you might think deliberation is just some artificial thing that we introduce in the classroom, but actually, in real life, that's what all of us do in society. We get together with others to deliberate what we should do for our society, what kinds of laws should we pass, what kinds of policies should we implement, how should we implement different policies, what are the main problems in society. So those arise from deliberation. So we want to teach young people how to deliberate with others with the eye of making a collective decision. So these are two different kinds of questions, and I'm pretty sure that we don't have time for you to think about it. But if you're in an in-person workshop, I would certainly ask you all to compare and contrast these two sets of questions that one can use in the classroom. As you notice, the ones on the left, which start off with the word should. So should our country accept more refugees? Should commercial logging be banned? Should fossil fuels be banned? Yes, Natalia, it is more of yes or no. It's a binary, right? But the questions on the right, where how can we support vulnerable people from war-torn countries, it is not a yes or no question. It's not binary. It's more of how can we, it's more open-ended. Like, how can we better protect the health of women? How can rainforests in Asia and South America be protected? So those are more open-ended. It doesn't lock you into a binary, right? Where you can get into significant arguments because people have different value systems. But if you frame the starting question in your classroom for a deliberation as with how can we do this? It changes the tone, it changes the direction of the conversation. As you can see, it's more open-ended, right? And also, as some of my students have told me, they think that the questions on the right are more forward-looking. So we are not just stuck in a philosophical discussion. We are moving towards taking action. And I think that is very valuable as we think about the kinds of questions that we use to guide students' thinking and guide students' framing of the issue. All right. So this is just a starting point. So thinking about framing. So there are many different kinds of deliberation. One very popular one that's been used in many countries is called structured academic controversy. That relies on the questions that are a bit more binary. So should we do X or Y? Or should we do X or not? So that's useful, right? And I think it has its place in the classroom, and you should certainly go and do a Google search for different strategies that you can use in the classroom to implement structured academic controversy. But collaborative deliberation rests on the questions on the right, the how questions. Okay, so I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking a little bit about the 8 different dimensions of collaborative deliberation that we have come up with. So this is a little bit small, but you can see where hope comes into play, where empathy and compassion comes into play as well. And it also rests on 2 key concepts that Dr. Barton and I have developed: critical harmony and social justice. If you're interested, we have articles and books you can just Google. And if you need more resources or you're interested to read up more on it, please email us and we're happy to share those resources. So, you can get more examples from our website, justiceandharmony.com, and as well as more information about different other points. So there are 8 guidelines for this collaborative deliberation model for hope. We have developed it to be quite general, but again, as Professor Barton has talked about, we don't know your circumstance. We don't know what's the curriculum that you're using, but we are hoping that you'll be able to adapt some or all of it for your setting. All right. So please, and we are also interested to find out how you adapt it as well. So the first guideline is how do you decide what kind of issues should I introduce in the classroom, and how big or how small should it be, right? And we suggest that it should be an authentic issue, something that students encounter in real life, or something that is directly affecting their lives or the lives of people around them. But we want to avoid overly broad issues such as, climate change, poverty, racism. It's impossible to expect students to come up with solutions for such big issues. But we want to narrow it down and consider the scope and scale. So rather than asking students to solve the problem of climate change, we could narrow it down a little bit to think about, okay, one element of climate change is sea level rise. Okay, and what does sea level rise do? It results in increased flooding and affects coastal communities, especially, and we can use as a case study, the small island community of Kiribati in the Pacific. So first guideline, select an appropriately bounded and feasible social problem, something that students can realistically address or come up with solutions for it. So this second guideline is about framing the question. And this is what I talked about earlier, right? It cannot be a closed framing where the answer is yes or no, but it needs to be an open-ended framing of the issue, right? So it shouldn't be adversarial, and it should highlight a shared or common concern. So back to the example, should fossil fuels be banned? All right. So rather than posing that question, which can result in endless arguments, we could frame it as in terms of supporting communities who live along the coast. So how can we help coastal communities that are vulnerable to rising sea levels and flooding? Okay, as a different question, should hate speech be permitted? Again, one can get into a very long philosophical argument about that, and I'm sure many of y'all have been engaged in that before. But we can frame it as protecting the safety of a vulnerable group. So how can vulnerable groups be protected against verbal attacks? So you can see the second questions are more open-ended. They are not binary, right? So they're not closed questions. And so that's a really important starting point. The third guideline is that we want to help young people learn to care about others. Okay? Yes, we can tell young people about all these terrible things that are happening in the world, but if we don't care about what's happening to them, to other people, they're like, it's not my business. Why should I care? That means that we are not succeeding in our primary goals in terms of a global citizenship education. So what strategies can we use to help young people care about these issues, extend empathy and compassion to those affected? So one strategy that we've suggested is to help young people learn about the concrete circumstances. So in other words, we don't want, for example, them to learn about refugees as a big amorphous group, but highlighting individual or collective experiences would be much more valuable, right? So and using stories, words, or images that convey experiences and feelings in emotionally compelling ways. And also not forgetting the larger structural forces. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to talk about one example. So just now I mentioned a Pacific island community called Kiribati. This is a world map that shows where Kiribati is. It's right smack in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And it's a tiny, tiny country with a collection of atolls that are very low-lying and constantly get flooded. So how do we get students to think about, to have care and compassion and empathize with regard to the experiences of the people living so far away, right? And just now I mentioned something about using images, words, stories, videos. So this is an example of a kind of video that you can use. So I'm just going to play 2 minutes of this video to show you the concrete circumstances in which the people of Kiribati experience as a result of sea level rise and flooding.
Ieri che tu non te pun tay bikin nga pungin sus ari toni pe ang dia pa titin ka kya kusin tay nakon tayo ka.
All right, so you can see that this video is very compelling because it highlights the personal experiences of two of the people living on Kiribati, this young 8-year-old girl as well as this old man, and they're talking about their day-to-day experiences. So you can see this is so much more compelling than, for example, introducing abstract statistics and ideas. All right, images like this, as well as stories about what happened during a storm in a hospital maternity ward where mothers and their babies had to be evacuated, and this is the result of it. All right, again, much more compelling, right, in terms of getting students to care about this particular issue. So the fourth guideline is to make a broad question a bit narrower so that students can address it. So rather than asking students, all right, come up with policies to solve coastal flooding in Kiribati due to sea level rise, you can break down into sub-questions. So how can we minimize coastal erosion and land degradation? How can we protect the homes? How can we encourage healthy growth of coastal wetlands? Because we know that mangrove swamps and coastal wetlands can protect the coastline. The fifth one is to bring in what we call distant voices. This is really important when you want to talk about global citizenship education, because you want to bring different voices to the table. You can't assume that living in the US and somebody from Singapore can truly understand what's going on in that little Pacific island country of Kiribati. So therefore, we need to hear from those voices, whether it's through stories, through testimonies, through videos, or through articles and things like that. So we need to hear from other people in order to develop good understandings of the issue and to come up with good policies. So the sixth guideline is where hope comes in. You must explicitly introduce examples of case studies that demonstrate pragmatic and visionary hopeful possibilities of collective change. If you continue watching that video, towards the end of the video, it shows the people of Kiribati trying to plant native vegetation so that these vegetation can help protect the community against the coastal erosion and flooding. So that is an example of pragmatic hope, right? It's a small thing. They're not trying to solve climate change. They're not trying to solve sea level rise, but they are planting native vegetation. So mangrove trees, native plants, so that it could help protect the coastline from erosion and to prevent future flooding. So this is where hope comes into play. You, as a teacher, I think it's really important to bring in examples of possibilities and possibilities that have worked so that students can see what they can possibly achieve in the future. So again, we don't need to go too much into depth. So visionary hope, that's a long-term goal. A very broad, ambitious goal. Pragmatic hope is perhaps smaller ones. The seventh guideline is to make sure that when students are deliberating together, we want to be inclusive. So we want to embrace different forms of communication. Some people prefer using data and statistics. Some people prefer using personal testimony or stories. But we want to make sure that there is space for the students to express themselves, especially if they have emotion or passion. Too often as teachers, we want to cut out the emotion. We want to cut out the passion. We want them to talk about it objectively and dispassionately. But emotion and passion is really important in teaching. So I think that's something that we want to pay attention to. The eighth and last guideline is planning action. How do we plan action to address the questions that we have earlier, right? And how do we implement them? So we have different ways of getting young people to think about planning. This is a decision matrix that students can fill out. So at the center is your issue or problem. Then your students will study about this problem here. They have all the background information. They will deliberate with each other, and they come up with perhaps 3 examples of possible social actions. And then they examine the consequences, whether positive, whether negative. They examine what are the implications, what are the intended implications, and what are the unintended outcomes. So this is a useful matrix to help students organize their decision making. This is a quick overview of the collaborative deliberation model that I just talked about. We have published an article. I think this QR code leads to that article. Dr. Barton, do you know whether this is the one that still works? But if not, we are happy to
I'm
send
not
the
certain about it.
article off.
People will find out quickly enough, and I'm not sure.
Yes. So this is a short article that we wrote for teachers about collaborative deliberation. And if you're interested, hopefully this works. If not, there is a link on our website, justiceandharmony.com. If that doesn't work, feel free to reach out to us. So in summary, what Dr. Barton and I have talked about today is about hope and the different dimensions of hope, and how that is really important in global citizenship education. And one way of addressing global citizenship education and hope is to use this collaborative deliberation model with its 8 guidelines. We look forward to hearing from you and the conversation that we will have very shortly. So these are our contact. We can put in our contact details at the end.
It's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. Excellent. Or you can go to our website and our contact details are there. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And if we have time, our audience wanted to ask some questions. For example, what classroom practices or strategies can build a sense of hope among students? Yes, we talked about it actually.
Yes, I think that is a very good question, and it's addressed in both of our talks actually. So thinking about hope in different ways, so pragmatic hope, visionary hope, bringing in possibilities, goals, and pathways, but also introducing stories, videos, case studies, even statistics. A whole range of resources can be used in the classroom.
Yes, thank you so much. And one more question. What challenges might teachers face when trying to nurture hope and global citizenship, and how can they overcome them?
You know, as teachers, we all think that we should be able to work magic. And the reality is we can't always. Students are part of larger context, families and communities and nations and the whole world. And so it may be that they are receiving messages from other places that are at odds with what we would like for them to learn. We have to be aware that not every student is going to be enthusiastically on board, whether we're teaching them about hope or anything else. But I think what we can reassure ourselves of is that even if they're not hearing these messages from anywhere else, at least they're hearing them from us. So again, students may not fully buy into what we have to say about any topic, but it's better for us to be providing these perspectives than to just give up.
Yes, and also as teachers, I work in environmental education as well, which is closely tied to global citizenship education. And many teachers assume that if they give students the bad news, the students will be extra motivated to go and change things. It's like, so they're telling them that this is the terrible statistics of the number of people who are affected or who are starving, or the number of refugees, if you want to talk about other issues. So students are constantly bombarded in school and in outside of school with all these very negative messages. So I argue that it's very important for teachers to consciously bring in possibilities, hopeful possibilities into the classroom and show students how they can achieve them. And that to me is one really important strategy.
Yes, we had here one question. Natalia was asking about in what subjects can we implement it, but actually I think that it can be done in all subjects, but we mainly focus on English because it's a global language and we have more opportunities and more chances to foster global citizenship in our students.
But also along those lines, we were talking to a teacher in New Zealand several weeks ago. We pulled together a teacher at a school had pulled together a group of teachers, and one of them was a teacher of statistics. And we thought, why has she pulled in this statistics teacher? But it turns out she taught statistics largely through statistics about social issues. And so, there's a lot of potential for this in many different subjects. Social studies education, but certainly in literature, in English, in math, and many social issues relate to science. So there's probably more opportunities than we might think of at first glance.
Yes. Yes, and I think we don't have questions. Yes, dear Gulbin, can you see any questions?
Not really. A lot of nice comments and remarks, responses.
Yeah, nice comments and
Yeah, but if you have any questions, we would be happy to hear them, or any comments. Just feel free to write in chat box or raise your voice if you like.
yeah. Yes, so if we have no questions, so I would like first of all to thank you, our dear guests, Professor Keith Barton and Professor Li-Ching Ho. Thank you so much for taking the time for joining us and for sharing your insights and for inspiring us today. And also, I would like to thank our audience for being here, for being active. Thank you so much. And I hope that today's session was really valuable for all of you, and it gave you practical ideas to bring hope and global citizenship into your classrooms. And just we look forward to seeing you in our future webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you and see you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.